Welcome to the Digital Identity Digest, the audio companion to the blog at Spherical Cow Consulting. I'm Heather Flanagan, and every week I break down interesting topics in the field of digital identity, from credentials and standards to browser weirdness and policy twists. If you work with digital identity but don't have time to follow every specification or hype cycle, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Welcome back. So in the last post in this series, Discovery was about reconstructing a person's digital life from accounts or inboxes, subscriptions, platform traces, breach reports. The discoverer was still recognizably human, the account holder or a family member or an executor, a fiduciary, or someone trying to make sense of the digital mess that people have or have left behind. So in this post, the discoverer may be software. That does not make this an entirely different discovery problem. The thread through the series is that discovery problems share some common characteristics. Something exists somewhere, someone or something needs to find it, and the discovery process has costs and risks, and the act of finding it changes what can happen next. No one discovers something for the sheer joy of discovery, at least not in the systems we're talking about here. People in software discover things because they intend to read or access, invoke, recover, govern, delete, do something. What changes with things like agentic AI and MCP style systems is the mechanics of discovery, the thing being discovered, and the immediacy with which action may follow. The result of discovery may not be a page to read or an account to recover. It may be a tool, a capability to invoke, a server to connect to, or an action path that can be selected by software. And that makes the discovery part of the control plane, a place where capability, trust, policy, and action start to merge, which is exactly the kind of sentence that sounds perfectly reasonable until you stop and ask, wait, who is allowed to find what? How are they finding it? And what happens when they do? I mean, some of you may think of this as endpoint discovery, and endpoint discovery is certainly not a new problem. Distributed systems have needed ways to find the right service location for a very long time. Hard code every URL, address, route, service location, and interface is kind of brittle because services move or regions change or capabilities differ. Networks get weird because networks are contractually obligated to get weird. Great, even discovery traffic can become part of the problem. Multicast discovery works beautifully when a laptop needs to find a printer on a small local network, but it gets less charming when that traffic is poorly scoped, repeated too aggressively, or bridged across boundaries where local no longer really means local. At that point, discovery stops being a quiet lookup and becomes just operational noise. A pretty good example comes from Amazon Web Services. In some AWS services, an SDK, a software development kit, can retrieve available service endpoints at runtime before using one of those endpoints for later operations. In Amazon TimeStream, for example, the SDK can call something called describe endpoints to retrieve available endpoints and then use those endpoints for specific operations. That endpoint discovery is, in a familiar sense, it's code asking where to send the request so it doesn't have to assume yesterday's endpoint is still the right one. And that version of discovery is very important, but it is relatively narrow. It's mostly about location and configuration. Where is the service? What endpoints are available? How should a client connect? But then, because technology rarely stops while things are being understandable, the same pattern starts showing up under different operating conditions. Even the phrase endpoint discovery doesn't actually just mean one thing. In endpoint security, endpoint discovery may have little to do with finding service URLs. It may mean discovering sensitive data on managed devices. A system may be scanning managed laptops to identify credit card numbers or social security numbers or personal health information or some kind of organization-specific terms. That system is not asking where to send a request. It's asking what sensitive information exists, where is it stored, and whether action may be needed. The point is not that these are unrelated uses of the same term, actually kind of almost the opposite. They are variations on the same discovery pattern, but under different operating conditions. I mean, one way to keep this straight is to ask, well, what kind of object is being discovered? Sometimes it's a location, where is the service endpoint, but sometimes it's data, what sensitive information exists on a managed device. Sometimes it's a capability, what can this tool do? And sometimes it's authority, who or what is allowed to act. Now, these categories can absolutely overlap, but confusing them is how discovery designs get kind of sloppy. Which, oddly enough, brings us to MCP, the Model Context Protocol, because MCP is one place where the discovery question starts to change shape a little bit. At a high level, MCP gives AI applications a structured way to connect to external sources of context and capability. An MCP host, such as an AI application, establishes connections to one or more MCP servers. Those servers may expose resources, prompts, and tools. Tools are especially interesting because tools are where information starts to become action. In a sort of classic service discovery model, the question may be, where is the endpoint? But in an MCP style tool discovery model, the question becomes a lot broader. What tools are available? What do they claim to do? What inputs do they accept? Who exposes them? Who's allowed to use them? What should the model do with them? What should require approval? What should be logged? What should never be available to the user in the first place? I mean, that's not just endpoint discovery with a new name, that's capability discovery. And capability discovery gets kind of lively. A tool is not useful to an AI system simply because it exists. It has to be described. The model, the host, the client, the gateway, the surrounding systems need some representation of what the tool does, what input it accepts, what outputs it returns, and when it might be relevant. And that description is not harmless documentation. The moment discovery can lead to action, metadata stops just being description, it becomes part of your control surface. If a tool says that it can list services, that sounds fine. If it can get to deployment history, probably fine, depending on who's asking. If it can get to compare versions, sure. If it can get to restart production, delete records, send messages, transfer funds, or grant access, I have questions. The tool description matters because it influences whether the tool appears relevant. It may influence whether a model selects it, whether a user approves it, whether a policy engine allows it, and whether a security team later understands what happened. If the description is inaccurate or stale or vague or broad or even actively malicious, discovery becomes a path to bad decisions. You want to know who wrote the description, who reviewed it, who decided that it's accurate. Can a tool exaggerate what it does? Can it hide what it does? Can an internal tool be surfaced to the wrong user because the discovery layer understands function but not authority? These are not theoretical questions. They are the same family of problems that show up whenever metadata becomes operational. Bad metadata makes for bad systems. Stale metadata makes for confusing systems, and overly trusting metadata makes systems that look efficient right up until they do something, let's call it impressively regrettable. Yay for automation. Now, one trap here is assuming that because a tool is discoverable, it is available, and because it's available, it should be usable. These are entirely different claims. A tool may exist, it may be visible to the system, it may be visible to the model, it may be visible to the user, it may be callable by the client. It may be available in development and absolutely not available in production unless someone enjoys emergency meetings. Discovery only answers part of your question. This is actually where some of the earlier posts in the series come back. In the post on identity discovery, I use the phrase governed matching, which is matching the right identity related thing to the right request under the right rules. Tool discovery needs exactly the same discipline. We need to match the right capability to the right task under the right authority. And that authority may come from different places. It may come from the user, or from enterprise policy, or from a delegated role, or from OAuth scopes, access control rules, even a deeply beloved internal spreadsheet that everyone knows is load bearing, but no one wants to admit it exists. The point is that discoverability cannot be treated as permission. It has to feed into permission, policy, audit, and user understanding. Otherwise, the system becomes very good at finding things it should not be able to use. Discovering a tool is one problem. Discovering an agent is another, right? A tool may expose a capability. An agent may claim to act for something or someone, and that moves discovery a little bit closer to identity and delegation. Who is this agent? Who operates it? What is it authorized to do? Is it acting for a person or a team or a company or a workload, another agent? Or do we have no idea? And this is where agent discovery becomes authority discovery. An agent is not just a thing that can be found, it may be a thing that claims to act. Once you introduce acting, the discovery problem cannot stop at location, description, or capability. It has to ask about identity, authority, delegation, policy, and accountability. The industry has been circling this problem from several directions. If you search through the IETF work on discovery, that turns up material that's in routing. It talks about certificates, service discovery, AI discovery endpoints, agent discovery, MCP DNS discovery, DNS for AI discovery, all sorts of things. These efforts are obviously not solving the same problem, and they're not any evidence of consensus about any of these problems, but they are evidence that distributed systems just keep running into discovery as a recurring design issue. Rediscovering the discovery problem is a terrible phrase. Unfortunately, it's also accurate for where the industry lives. So the amount of activity, I think, tells us something important, and that's discovery is not one problem waiting for one mechanism. It is a family of recurring problems. Some are about location, some are about naming, some are about metadata, some are about capabilities, some are about authority, some are about policy, and some are about whether a thing should be findable at all. All that matters because just make it discoverable is not a design requirement. That's actually a warning label if that's where you're going. If discovery determines which tools are visible, which servers are approved, or which capabilities are recommended, then discovery is part of your control plane. It shapes not only what can be found, but what becomes available to do next. Doesn't mean discovery is the whole control plane, right? You've still got authentication, authorization, logging, monitoring, governance. They all still matter. Of course they do. But discovery sits at the front of many of those decisions, and it shapes the menu of possible actions before the action happens. That makes discovery politically and operationally very interesting. Whoever controls the discovery layer can shape what appears easy, preferred, legitimate, safe, supported, or invisible. A curated enterprise catalog can reduce risk and can help people find approved tools, but it can also become a bottleneck or a gatekeeper or a place where outdated assumptions become infrastructure. An open registry can support experimentation and use, but it can also become a catalog of things that look useful until someone asks whether they are trustworthy, maintained, authorized, or malicious. All of this is not a new tension, right? Search had ranking, Federation had discovery interfaces, consumer IAM had login options, personal account discovery had inboxes and password managers. Every discovery layer shapes behavior because people and systems tend to use what they can find. I think the sharper issue here is not that discovery leads to action, though it certainly does. The issue is that software mediated discovery can shorten the distance between finding, selecting, authorizing, and invoking. What gets discovered may become part of an action path before a human fully understands the choice being made, and that should make us cautious. Once discovery becomes a control plane problem, the next instinct is to pick the infrastructure for it. Do you use DNS, like .well known? Do you use registries or sign manifests or trust lists, MCP gateways? Some combination of all the above. Who knows, right? The instinct is understandable. Infrastructure gives the conversation something concrete to live on. It lets people move from what is this problem to where do we put the record? But that's the next trap, right? Discovery was always connected to action. Agentic systems make the connection faster, more automated, and more scalable, and harder to inspect. So before choosing the mechanism, we really need to know what kind of discovery problem we're solving. What is being discovered? Who's doing the discovering? What authority they have? What happens if the answer is wrong? And what happens after discovery succeeds? Otherwise, we're not actually designing discovery. We're just sort of moving confusion into a more authoritative looking location. And that's going to take us to the final post in this series. Thank you for listening, and I hope you tune in again next week. And that's it for this week's episode of the Digital Identity Digest. If it helps make things a little clearer, or at least a little more interesting, share it with a friend or colleague and connect with me on LinkedIn at HL Flanagan. And if you enjoyed the show, do be sure to subscribe and leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find the written full post at sphericalcowconsulting.com. Now stay curious, stay engaged, and let's get these conversations going.